Asterisk. He told a black janitor he didn't belong in the building. But just 5 minutes later, that same CEO was on his knees, begging the very man he insulted to save his life. What happened inside that office will leave you shocked, angry, and maybe even inspired. Stay tuned, because this story is about to show you that dignity and courage have more power than money or titles. Asterisk. Asterisk. If you love powerful, true-to-life stories that open hearts and teach unforgettable lessons, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, join our family, and never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. Asterisk. Black people don't belong here. The words didn't just echo. They exploded through the polished marble lobby like a gunshot, silencing the entire floor. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Coffee cups trembled in hands, and keyboards stopped clacking. It was as if time itself paused for one dreadful moment. The man who had spoken was Mr. Harrison, the CEO. He was a tall, commanding figure in a tailored Navy suit that probably cost more than some of his employees' monthly salaries. His hair was slicked back. His shoes shined so brightly they reflected the overhead lights, and his eyes carried a constant sharpness that kept everyone on edge. He was feared more than respected, and in that moment, his gaze was locked on one man, the janitor, Marcus. Marcus stood quietly in the corner, a mop in his hand, his work boots slightly damp from cleaning the marble tiles. He was a man in his late 30s, with a strong build from years of labor and a calm presence that contrasted with the chaos around him. His dark skin glistened with a faint sheen of sweat, not from nerves but from honest work. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't even looked at the CEO. He was simply doing his job. And yet, out of nowhere, Harrison unleashed those venomous words. The room reacted instantly. A young receptionist gasped so loudly she covered her mouth. A group of interns exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to keep standing or walk away. 2 middle managers shook their heads in disgust but stayed silent, unwilling to risk their jobs. A security guard standing near the glass door shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between speaking up and keeping his position. Marcus froze for a moment, not because he was shocked. He had endured countless rude remarks in his life, but because of the weight of this one. It wasn't a drunk stranger on the street or some anonymous online comment. It was his boss, the man who ran the company, the man everyone looked up to, or at least pretended to. Inside Marcus's chest, something twisted. His heart pounded, but his face remained calm. He had been raised by a grandmother who always told him, never let hateful words control your spirit. Let them bounce off you and keep walking. Those words had carried him through schoolyard bullying, through unfair treatment at jobs, through long nights where the world seemed stacked against him. So, instead of lashing out, Marcus did what he always did. He lowered his eyes, gripped the mop handle a little tighter, and whispered to himself, I know my worth. His words don't define me. But the silence in the room said everything. Everyone heard the insult. Everyone saw the cruelty. And everyone felt the sting of it, even those who weren't the target. Harrison, however, didn't notice or didn't care. He adjusted his tie, turned sharply on his polished heel, and strode toward the elevator as if nothing had happened. His arrogance filled the room long after his footsteps faded. As the elevator doors closed behind him, the lobby buzzed with hushed voices. Did he really just say that? One in turn whispered. Unbelievable! Another muttered. I can't believe he'd say that out loud. In front of everyone, a manager said under his breath, but no one spoke too loudly. Fear wrapped itself around their throats. After all, Harrison wasn't just any man. He was a CEO. In this building, his word was law. Speaking against him could mean the end of a career. Marcus, however, stayed quiet. He bent down, wrung out the mop, and returned to cleaning the floor. His movements were steady, almost graceful, as if he had decided that his dignity would not be broken by a man's ignorance. Still inside him, emotions clashed like storm waves. Anger tried to rise, pride tried to scream, but discipline kept them both in check. Marcus thought of his little daughter at home, who always asked him, Daddy, are you the hero of your work? He wanted to be able to look her in the eye and say yes, even if the world tried to make him feel small. Across the lobby, A young employee named Daniel approached him hesitantly. Daniel was new, barely a month into the job, and the cruelty of the CEO's words had shaken him deeply. "Marcus," he whispered softly, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. That was wrong." Marcus gave him a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, but was filled with calm strength. "Don't be sorry for me, son. Be sorry for him. A man who carries hate in his heart is a man already trapped." Those words stuck with Daniel, and with a few others who overheard. For them, Marcus's quiet strength was louder than the CEO's insult, but for Marcus himself, it was another reminder of the uphill climb he faced daily. To some, he would never be more than just a janitor. They wouldn't see the man who worked 2 jobs to support his family, who volunteered at the community center on weekends, who had once dreamed of being an engineer but had to set aside his education to take care of his younger siblings. To them, he was invisible until they wanted to insult him. As he continued his work, mopping the same floor where the insult had been spoken, Marcus silently made a choice. He would not allow bitterness to rot his soul. He had seen too many people consumed by anger, and he knew it only poisoned the person who held it. Instead, he would keep doing what he always did: work with dignity, show respect even when it wasn't shown to him, and trust that life had its way of balancing things out. What Marcus didn't know was that balance would come far sooner than he expected. And when it did, the same CEO who had declared that black people don't belong here would find himself on his knees, begging for Marcus's help. The morning passed slowly after the CEO's cruel outburst. Yet for those who had witnessed it, the sting lingered in the air like a foul odor no amount of air freshener could mask. Conversations became more hushed, footsteps quicker, and laughter, once common near the coffee machine, was absent. Everyone moved carefully, like mice trying not to disturb a predator. That predator was Mr. Harrison. From the moment he returned to the office floors, his arrogance dominated the atmosphere. He walked with swagger, shoulders back, chin lifted as though the entire company existed solely to bow before him. His leather shoes clicked sharply against the polished tiles, each step like a hammer striking fear into the hearts of his employees. "Where's the report I asked for?" he barked at a trembling junior manager. "It's almost ready, sir. Just a few more adjustments." "Almost ready?" Harrison cut him off with a mocking laugh. "If you can't deliver on time, maybe you should consider a job that doesn't require a brain, like mopping floors." A few employees glanced at Marcus when they heard that, their faces tightening with disgust. The insult was a deliberate jab, and they all knew it. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. He was busy polishing a brass railing nearby, his movement steady, his expression calm. The cruelty didn't stop there. Harrison moved from one department to another, pointing out mistakes, tearing apart presentations, and humiliating staff in front of their peers. He seemed to feed on fear, his energy growing each time he reduced someone to silence. One employee, a young woman in the marketing department, tried to defend her work. "Sir, I believe the strategy will." "Believe?" Harrison sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't pay you to believe. I pay you to deliver results. If belief could earn profits, I'd hire priests instead of marketers." The woman's face turned red as she lowered her head, holding back tears. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. That was part of who he was. While others saw him as just a janitor, Marcus's quiet presence allowed him to observe the true heartbeat of the office. He saw the way shoulders slumped after Harrison passed, the way smiles vanished when his shadow fell across desks, the way people forced themselves to nod and agree even when they knew he was wrong. As Marcus wiped down a glass door, a young intern whispered to him, I don't understand how you can stand it. The way he talks to you, the way he talks to everyone. It's not fair." Marcus gave the boy a gentle look and replied softly, "Life isn't always fair, son. But fairness isn't something we wait for. It's something we practice, even when others don't." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The intern straightened his back a little, inspired by Marcus's quiet resilience. Meanwhile, Harrison continued his reign of arrogance. He called an impromptu meeting in the main conference room, where dozens of employees gathered nervously with their laptops and notepads. He paced at the front like a general preparing for battle, his voice booming. "This company needs results, not excuses. If you can't give me what I demand, then pack your bags and leave. There are thousands of people begging for jobs out there. I can replace any one of you in a second." The words cut deep. Some employees clenched their fists beneath the table. Others avoided eye contact, praying not to be singled out. And still, Marcus stood outside the glass wall, quietly emptying the trash bins, listening. Though invisible to most, Marcus understood something others didn't. The CEO's cruelty wasn't a sign of strength. It was a mask for weakness. A truly strong leader inspired respect through fairness and vision. But Harrison? He only knew how to rule through fear. And fear, Marcus knew, never lasted forever. As the meeting dragged on, Harrison noticed Marcus outside and smirked. He raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "And remember, if you don't want to end up like the janitor out there, with no future and no skills, then you'd better work harder." Dozens of eyes turned toward Marcus, some full of pity, others of anger. Marcus simply lifted the trash bag, tied it neatly, and walked away with quiet dignity. His silence spoke louder than any words could, but the cruelty weighed on the staff. When Harrison finally dismissed them, the room emptied in silence, like a funeral procession. Not one person dared to speak against him. Later that afternoon, while Harrison barked into his phone about quarterly profits, Marcus was in the break room, carefully scrubbing a coffee stain from the counter. A young manager entered, clearly shaken. He leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. Marcus glanced up. "Long day?" The manager sighed. "Feels like I'm walking on glass every second. One mistake and he'll tear me apart." He hesitated, then asked, "How do you do it, Marcus? How do you stay calm when he humiliates you in front of everyone?" Marcus paused, wrung out his cloth, and replied, "Because his words don't belong to me. They belong to him. If I carry them, they'll poison me. So I let them stay where they came from." The manager nodded slowly, letting the wisdom sink in. And that was the truth. While Harrison believed he was showing strength, it was Marcus who displayed true power, the power of self-control, the strength to rise above hate without letting it destroy him. But fate has a strange way of humbling the proud. Harrison thought his arrogance made him untouchable, that his position placed him above others. What he didn't know was that the same janitor he mocked that day would soon become the very person who stood between him and death. The day was not over, and destiny was preparing its lesson. The day had dragged on like any other. Endless meetings, countless reports, and Mr. Harrison's sharp tongue lashing out at anyone who dared to fall short of his impossible standards. Employees were drained, morale was at rock bottom, and Marcus continued his quiet work, moving unnoticed in the background. But then, without warning, everything changed. At first, it was subtle. A faint burning smell drifted through the air vents. A few employees wrinkled their noses, whispering, "Do you smell that?" One of the interns thought maybe someone had burnt popcorn in the break room. Nobody imagined what was truly happening. Minutes later, the building's fire alarm erupted. The shrill, piercing sound blared through every floor, red emergency lights flashing against the sleek white walls. Confusion spread instantly. People looked up from their desks wide-eyed, unsure if it was a drill. Some laughed nervously. Others reached for their bags. Then the smoke appeared. Thin gray wisps curled out of the stairwell doors and ventilation shafts. Within moments, the smell of burning plastic and paper filled the air, and panic set in. "Fire! There's a fire!" someone screamed. The once orderly office turned into chaos. Chairs toppled, paper scattered, and frightened voices overlapped as employees rushed toward the exits. Shoes pounded against the polished floors, and the sharp click of high heels echoed like a drum of fear. In the middle of the chaos, Marcus's instincts kicked in. His years as a volunteer firefighter before becoming a janitor came flooding back. While others panicked, he remained calm, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "Stay low. Cover your mouths," he shouted, guiding people toward the emergency exits. "This way. Don't push. Help each other." His calm tone gave people direction when fear threatened to paralyze them. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and quickly sprayed a small flame that had ignited near a desk. clearing a path for workers to escape. Meanwhile, the CEO, Mr. Harrison, was in his glass-walled office on the top floor. He had ignored the alarm at first, assuming it was just another drill. He shouted into his phone, annoyed. "Can you believe this? They picked today of all days for a test alarm. Ridiculous." But when the smoke began seeping under his office door, his arrogance crumbled into panic. He coughed violently, dropping the phone, his face turning pale as realization hit. This was no drill. He rushed to the door, but when he yanked it open, thick smoke poured in, choking him instantly. He slammed it shut, gasping for air, his expensive suit clinging to him with sweat. His once commanding voice now cracked with desperation as he pounded on the glass walls. "Help! Somebody help me!" But outside, the hallways were already deserted. Employees had rushed downstairs, following Marcus's calm instructions. No one could hear him from behind the heavy glass. For the first time, the powerful CEO found himself completely helpless. Down below, Marcus was leading groups of employees down the stairwell. He made sure no one was left behind on each floor, scanning the rooms with sharp eyes before moving on. "Don't run, steady steps. Keep your heads low," he repeated like a steady drumbeat of reassurance. But just as he was about to guide the last group to safety, a terrified secretary grabbed his arm. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice shaking. "Mr. Harrison, he's still upstairs. He never came down." Marcus froze. For a brief second, the insult from earlier echoed in his mind. Black people don't belong here. That hateful statement could have been his reason to walk away, to let the man face the consequences of his arrogance. Many people would have. But Marcus wasn't like many people. His grandmother's words replayed in his heart. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love, only strength can do that. He clenched his jaw, grabbed another fire extinguisher, and without hesitation, turned back toward the smoke-filled stairwell. "Stay outside," he ordered the secretary. "I'll get him." The climb was brutal. Heat radiated through the walls. The acrid smoke burned his lungs, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. But Marcus moved with determination, one hand on the railing, the other gripping the extinguisher, inching closer to the top floor. By the time he reached Harrison's office, the glass walls were clouded with smoke. Inside, the CEO was on his knees, coughing, his once perfect hair disheveled, his expensive tie loosened. His eyes widened with shock and relief when he saw Marcus pushing through the smoke. "Marcus!" Harrison gasped, his voice raw. Please help me." The same man who had humiliated him hours earlier now begged for his life. The power dynamic had flipped completely. Marcus didn't waste time. He grabbed a wet cloth from his cleaning cart, one he'd soaked before heading up, and shoved it into Harrison's trembling hands. "Cover your mouth and nose. Stay low. Follow me." Harrison obeyed without question, crawling after Marcus like a lost child. Every few feet, the CEO stumbled, his body weakened by smoke inhalation. Marcus grabbed him by the arm, pulling him forward with strength and determination. "Don't stop. We're almost there." Marcus shouted over the roar of crackling flames. Step by step, floor by floor, he led Harrison to the suffocating smoke, guiding him down the stairwell. The CEO coughed, wheezed, and groaned, but Marcus refused to let him collapse. His grip was firm, his words steady, his courage unshakable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they burst through the exit doors into the open air. Cool oxygen filled their lungs as firefighters rushed past them into the building. Harrison collapsed to the ground, gasping, his suit stained with sweat and soot. Employees gathered around, staring in shock. Their all-powerful CEO, once untouchable and arrogant, now sat trembling on the pavement, alive only because a janitor he had insulted risked his life to save him. For the first time, Harrison didn't look powerful. He looked small, human, and very, very humbled. The cool evening air outside the building should have been refreshing, but for Mr. Harrison, it tasted like ash and shame. He sat on the curb, coughing violently, his once pristine suit stained with soot and sweat, his slick-back hair now disheveled and clinging to his forehead. The employees who had feared him only hours earlier now stood at a distance, whispering. They didn't see the untouchable CEO anymore. They saw a man who had nearly lost his life, and who owed it to the very person he had humiliated. And standing nearby, steady as ever, was Marcus. The janitor's clothes were singed, his hands blackened with soot, but his eyes were calm. His chest rose and fell with exhaustion, but he stood tall, like a quiet anchor in the chaos. Fire trucks roared, hoses blasted water at the flames, and paramedics rushed in and out of the scene. But in that moment, all eyes were drawn to the two men, the arrogant CEO who had mocked dignity, and the humble janitor who had just saved it. Marcus! Harrison's voice cracked, weak and trembling. His throat burned from smoke, his pride from something deeper. He looked up at the man who had risked everything to bring him out alive. His lips quivered as words fought their way out. You saved me." Marcus glanced down at him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in his deep, steady voice, he replied, "I wasn't saving you because of who you are. I saved you because it was the right thing to do." Those words hit harder than any insult Harrison had ever thrown at his employees. For the first time, he felt what they had felt all along, small, humbled, and ashamed. Around them, employees whispered. Some nodded, tears in their eyes, while others shook their heads in disbelief at the dramatic turn of fate. Only hours earlier, the CEO had declared, "Black people don't belong here." Now, here he was, alive only because a black janitor refused to let hate define his actions. Harrison lowered his head. He had no defense, no excuse. His entire career had been built on power, on commanding authority through fear, on believing his money and position made him untouchable. But in the face of fire, none of that mattered. His expensive watch couldn't buy him oxygen. His title couldn't lead him out of smoke-filled hallways. His arrogance couldn't keep him alive. Only Marcus, the man he had dismissed as beneath him, had been strong enough to guide him through. Paramedics approached with an oxygen mask, urging Harrison to breathe deeply. But even as he took it, his eyes remained locked on Marcus. "Why?" he croaked through the mask. "Why would you risk your life for me, after everything I said to you?" Marcus's gaze softened slightly. He crouched so they were eye level, his voice low but firm. "Because hate doesn't fix hate. If I let your words turn me bitter, then I'd be no better than you were when you said them. My job is to clean, Mr. Harrison. Sometimes that means more than floors. Sometimes it means cleaning up the mess people make with their hearts." Harrison's eyes filled with tears. He tried to look away, but the weight of Marcus's words pressed down on him like a burden he could no longer escape. For the first time in his adult life, he felt powerless, and in that powerlessness, he felt the truth. He had built his empire on the backs of others, convincing himself he was superior. But when the flames rose, it wasn't money, titles, or arrogance that saved him. It was humility, courage, and compassion, qualities he had never valued until now. The employees who stood watching began to whisper louder. "Did you hear what Marcus said?" one asked. "He saved him anyway, after all the insults." Another added, "That's real strength. That's what a leader should be." Harrison heard every word. It stung, but it also healed. For the first time, he saw the truth. Leadership wasn't about commanding fear. It was about earning respect. And respect couldn't be demanded. It had to be shown. With trembling hands, Harrison reached out to Marcus. His voice shook as he whispered, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. About you. About everything." Marcus looked at the hand, then back into Harrison's eyes. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Finally, Marcus gave a small nod, but didn't shake the hand. Instead, he said, "Don't tell me you're sorry. Show me. Show all of us." Those words lingered like an oath, heavy and unshakable. As firefighters declared the flames under control, and employees slowly returned to gather their things, Harrison remained seated on the curb, staring at the ground. His empire, his pride, his illusions of superiority, all of it fell hollow now. The man he had thought didn't belong had proven himself to be the most honorable person in the entire building. When Harrison finally stood, his legs still shaky, he looked around at the employees who had watched the entire scene. They no longer looked at him with fear. They looked at him with judgment, waiting to see if he would truly change. And for the first time in years, Harrison didn't feel above them. He felt level with them, equal. As he turned to Marcus, who was speaking calmly with a firefighter, Harrison realized the truth. The janitor he once dismissed had become his teacher, his savior, his mirror. And in that reflection, Harrison saw a man he did not like, but one he was determined to change. The humbling was complete. The arrogant CEO had been broken, not by fire, but by compassion. The next morning, the corporate building was quiet. The smoke had cleared, the fire had been extinguished, and crews worked to repair the damage. But for those who had been inside during the chaos, the scars ran deeper than charred walls or broken glass. Something had shifted forever. Word of what had happened spread like wildfire, not the flames, but the story of the janitor who had risked his life to save the CEO who had insulted him. By sunrise, nearly every employee knew the details. Some shared it with disbelief. Others told it with admiration. And some whispered it like a parable, a moral lesson too powerful to ignore. For Mr. Harrison, the once feared CEO, sleep had been impossible. He lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over, his desperate pleas, his choking coughs, and the strong hand of the man he had dismissed as less than pulling him through the darkness. He had faced his own mortality, and in that terrifying moment, all the things he once valued, money, power, status, had meant nothing. Only Marcus had mattered. By the time Harrison arrived at the building the next day, he wasn't the same man. The swagger in his walk was gone. His tie was loosely knotted, his step unsteady, and his face pale. Employees noticed the difference immediately. They had grown so used to seeing him tower over them, barking orders with cold authority. But today, his eyes carried something else. Guilt, shame, and perhaps humility. He entered the lobby, where Marcus was already at work, mop in hand, carefully cleaning the marble floors that had been covered in soot the day before. Marcus looked up briefly, gave a polite nod, and went back to his task. Harrison froze. Just one look at Marcus brought the weight of his words crashing back. Black people don't belong here. The memory stabbed him like a knife. And yet, here was the man he had demeaned, already back to work, carrying himself with quiet dignity as if nothing had happened. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Employees stopped what they were doing, waiting to see what would happen. Would Harrison pretend nothing had changed? Would he let his pride win again? Taking a deep breath, Harrison walked toward Marcus. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, came out low and hesitant. Marcus. Marcus straightened, resting both hands on the mop handle, and looked at him calmly. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. I'm listening, but choose your words carefully. Harrison swallowed hard. The weight of dozens of eyes on him made his palms sweat. For a man who had never apologized in his life, not to employees, not competitors, not even a family, the words felt like carrying boulders on his tongue. I was wrong, he finally said, his voice cracking. The things I said to you, the way I treated you, it was unforgivable. I judge you by the color of your skin, by your job, by things that don't define who you are. And then, when I needed help most, you were the only one who came back for me. You saved my life, Marcus, and I'll never be able to repay you. A hush fell over the lobby. Employees leaned forward, hanging on every word. Some even gasped. Never before had they heard their CEO speak with such humility. Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke softly, his words steady but firm. I didn't save you because of who you are, Mr. Harrison. I saved you because I knew it was the right thing to do. What you said yesterday hurt, but it didn't define me. Your apology matters, but what matters more is what you do after this. The words hit Harrison harder than the flames ever had. This wasn't just forgiveness. It was a challenge, a demand for change. Employees began nodding. Some even clapped quietly, breaking the tension. In that moment, everyone realized the truth. Marcus wasn't just a janitor. He was a man of integrity, strength, and wisdom, the kind of leader the company desperately needed. From that day forward, Harrison tried to live up to the lesson Marcus had given him. He called a company-wide meeting, where he stood in front of hundreds of employees and admitted his failures, not just as CEO, but as a man. His voice trembled as he confessed, I let arrogance blind me. I let prejudice poison my words. I disrespected the very people who keep this company alive, and for that, I am deeply sorry. He then turned to Marcus, who sat quietly in the front row, and said, "This man reminded me what true strength looks like. Not power, not money, not titles. Strength is dignity. Strength is compassion. Strength is doing the right thing, even when it's hard." Marcus showed me that, and from this day on, I promise to honor the dignity of every person in this company. The room erupted in applause. Some employees wiped away tears. For years, they had endured Harrison's cruelty, never daring to hope he would change. But now, change seemed possible because Marcus had lit the spark. As for Marcus, he didn't let the moment swell his pride. He returned to his work with the same quiet grace, still mopping floors, still greeting people with kindness. But to everyone who looked at him now, he wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a man who had saved their leader, and more importantly, saved their company from a culture of fear. In the weeks that followed, Harrison kept his promise. He implemented new policies to ensure respect and equality. He gave Marcus a raise and publicly recognized him at company events. More than that, he began to listen, to really listen to his employees. Slowly, the atmosphere in the building shifted. Fear faded. Respect grew. But perhaps the most powerful change wasn't the company. It was in Harrison himself. He no longer saw Marcus as less than. He saw him as a man who had taught him the most valuable lesson of his life. Respect has no color. Humanity has no rank. And dignity belongs to every soul. And as for Marcus, he carried on with humility, never boasting about what he had done. But deep inside, he knew one truth that gave him peace. Sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won in boardrooms or battles. They're won in the quiet strength of refusing to let hate win. That was a lesson Mr. Harrison would never forget, and neither would anyone else who witnessed it.